You ever leave town thinking your property, your sanctuary is safe, only to come back and find out someone tried to steal it right from under you? Yeah, that happened to me. This isn't some made-up story. This is about how my very own HOA. Karen, the kind of woman who lives to sniff out problems that don't exist, called 911 when I dared to walk into my own ranch house. And how I discovered she was planning to auction off my property while I was away. Grab a seat. Because this one's a ride, it started simple enough. I had planned a trip. Just me, the open road, and a break from the constant passive-aggressive notes taped to my mailbox by Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA. You know the type, always measuring lawns with rulers, writing complaints about unsightly garden gnomes, and somehow knowing everyone's business. I left the ranch in good shape, gates locked, animals cared for, bills paid. I even hired my buddy Mark to check in twice a week. I was going to be gone for 3 weeks, but life had other plans. Halfway through, something felt off. I can't explain it, call it intuition. I cut my trip short. When I pulled up to my driveway, suitcase in the back, I noticed something strange right away. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt road leading up to my property. Not mine, not Mark's, and definitely not the up's. Guy, he doesn't risk driving all the way. And then came the kicker. Right at the entrance, tied to the gate, was a bright red notice. Bold letters across the top read, Property LIEN subject to HOA action. I froze. What the hell? At first, I thought maybe it was a prank or some weird scam. But as I got closer, I saw the HOA's letterhead, stamped, signed, and right there. In Karen's unmistakable loopy handwriting, the words, failure to comply will result in auction. Auction. Of my ranch. I ripped the paper down, stormed inside, and that's when the situation exploded. Because waiting for me was Karen herself. Yep, this woman had let herself onto my property. She was standing in my living room, my boots still by the door, my coffee mug on the counter, and she was holding a clipboard like she owned the place. Excuse me, she snapped, like I was the intruder. You can't just barge in here. I blinked. Barge in. Lady, this is my house. Her eyes went wide and then narrowed. Without missing a beat, she pulled out her phone and said the line that would turn my quiet return into a full-blown circus. I'm calling 911. There's a trespasser. Now. I wish I could say I laughed it off. But she was dead serious. Within 10 minutes, I had 2 sheriff's deputies pulling up the driveway. Lights flashing. Sir, one of them asked me, hand resting near his holster. We got a call about a possible break-in. Who are you? Who am I? I'm the guy who built this ranch from the ground up. I showed them my license, my deed, my mail, even the electric bill with my name on it. But Karen wasn't done. She started spinning this wild tale about how I had abandoned the property. That, according to HOA rules, the land was already scheduled for auction to cover outstanding violations. Violations. What violations? The deputies looked at me, then back at her, clearly realizing something smelled rotten. Still, they had to check. And that's when Karen slipped up. Because in her fury, she admitted she had already contacted an auction house. She had scheduled a date. She had a flyer printed and ready to distribute, and it had my address, my home, my animals, all on it. That's when my stomach dropped. This wasn't just HOA harassment. This was an outright scheme, but before I could even start unraveling it, Karen crossed the line one more time. She looked me dead in the eye, with the deputies standing there, and said, "You should have stayed gone. Because by next week, this won't be yours anymore." That's when I knew this wasn't just about some power-hungry HOA president. This was about theft, fraud, and maybe even something worse. So I did what any sane person would do. I decided to fight back. But let me tell you, what I uncovered in the weeks that followed, it went way deeper than just Karen. This wasn't a one-woman operation. This was a conspiracy. Asterisk, asterisk, the deputy stood there, caught between Mitha rightful own and Karen, who was waving her clipboard like it was a royal decree. "Ma'am," one deputy said, "you don't have authority to evict anyone. You can't sell a property just because you're on the HOA board." Karen's face turned red. "You don't understand." He left. He abandoned the property. According to the bylaws, I cut her off. According to my deed, this land is mine. Always has been, always will be. The deputy shot me a look, almost apologetic, then turned to Karen. "Unless you've got a court order. This man isn't going anywhere." For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. She'd slink away, muttering under her breath, and I'd be able to get back to unpacking my suitcase. But Karen wasn't that type. Instead, she let out this bitter little laugh, the kind that says you don't know what's coming. She snapped her clipboard shut, pointed one manicured finger at me, and hissed, "You'll regret crossing me." Then she stormed out, leaving the deputies shaking their heads. Now, if this were a normal story, that'd be the climax. HOA Karen goes too far. The cops shut her down, and life goes back to normal. But this was just the beginning, because 2 days later, a letter showed up in my mailbox, certified, stamped, official-looking. It was from a law office I'd never heard of. Inside was a formal notice of default and impending auction. The letter claimed I owed the HOA over $45,000 in fines and fees. $40,000-$5,000. I nearly dropped the paper. The violations listed, they ranged from the absurd to the impossible. Failure to maintain fencing to HOA standards. Funny, since my ranch fencing had been inspected and approved just last year. Unauthorized. Livestock count exceeding HOA regulations. Except the HOA didn't even have regulations about livestock. This was a ranching community, and my personal favorite, excessive dust accumulation on private road. Yeah, they were charging me for dust. That's when it clicked. Karen wasn't bluffing. She wasn't just harassing me. She was building a case fabricating violations to justify selling my property. And worse, she had a lawyer helping her. I grabbed my phone and called Mark, the buddy who'd been watching the ranch. "Hey," I said, "did you notice anything weird while I was gone?" Mark let out a dry laugh. "Weird? Try insane. Karen's been out here almost every day, taking pictures of your barn, pacing your driveway. She even told me I wasn't allowed on the property anymore and threatened to call the cops if I came back. That explained the tire tracks. She's staging something," Mark continued. "She keeps saying you're behind on dues. But I know you paid them. I was with you when you wrote the check. I had every penny was current," which meant this was outright fraud. I spent the next day digging through every piece of paperwork I had. HOA statements, emails, bank records. Sure enough, my dues were fully paid. My fines, non-existent. Yet somehow Karen had manufactured a debt, and she had a lawyer willing to put it on paper. But why? That's when I decided to do a little digging of my own. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday night, held in the community center down by the subdivision entrance. Now, most of us ranch owners hated these meetings. They were nothing but Karen and her cronies arguing about mailbox heights and lawn ornaments. But I knew I had to go. When I walked in, the chatter died instantly. It was like the villain had entered the room. Karen sat at the head of the table, smug as ever, surrounded by 3 other board members. They all had binders. Mine was the only empty chair. "Well, well," Karen sneered. Look who decided to show up. The absentee landlord. I ignored her jab and sat down. Cut the theatrics. I want to know why I received a notice claiming I owe 45 grand in fines. The room got tense. One board member shifted uncomfortably. Another avoided my eyes. Karen, of course, smiled. Because you do. Our records show multiple violations. Failure to comply results in auction. It's all very simple. Funny, I said, because I've got my own records that prove I don't owe a dime. So unless you can show me evidence, you're committing fraud. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, grainy, badly lit shots of my property. A broken fence post. A muddy patch near the barn. A few cows standing near the road. This, she said, tapping the pictures, is evidence. I stared at them. That's not evidence? That's called ranch life, the board murmured. One of them even whispered, she might be pushing it too far. Karen's eyes flashed. Enough. A vote has already been scheduled. Unless payment is made in full. This property will be listed for auction in 30 days. That's when I dropped the bomb. I spoke to the sheriff and my attorney. Any attempt to auction my property without a court order is illegal. You're opening yourselves up to lawsuits. For the first time, Karen's smile faltered. Just for a second, but she recovered quickly. We'll see about that, she said coolly. I left the meeting boiling with anger, but also with clarity. Karen wasn't just bluffing. She had the board in her pocket, at least partly, but the cracks were showing, and I was going to pry them wide open. The next week was war. Every day, I found another violation notice taped to my gate. One morning, it was for unauthorized equipment stored in plain sight, my tractor. Another day, it was excessive noise disturbance, the windmill creaking. She was burying me in paper. But I wasn't backing down. I documented everything. Took photos. Recorded videos. Called witnesses. Then, one evening, as I was reviewing the latest stack of nonsense, I noticed something odd. The letterhead on the notices wasn't the same as the official HOA letterhead I'd seen before. The font was slightly different. The seal wasn't embossed, was printed. Karen wasn't. Even using real HOA stationery, which meant these notices might not even be officially sanctioned. That's when I realized the truth. Karen wasn't acting as the HOA president, she was acting alone, and if that was the case, then maybe her allies on the board weren't allies at all. Maybe they were victims too. I needed proof, so I came up with a plan. That Thursday, called Mark. I need you to set up a trail cam by the gate. Make sure it records anyone who comes near. Expecting trouble? He asked. Oh, I said, I'm counting on it. Sure enough. 2 nights later, around midnight, the camera caught her. Karen, sneaking onto my property. Stapling another fake notice to my fence. Alone, no board members. No witnesses. Just her, a flashlight, and that smug little smirk busted when I showed the footage to one of the board members, Tom. A quiet guy who mostly kept to himself, his jaw nearly hit the floor. She's doing this on her own, he whispered. Looks like it, I said. And if she's faking violations, how many of her official fines are fake too? That's when Tom admitted something that floored me. She's been controlling the books. We never see the financial reports. She just gives us summaries. We thought it was normal. Normal? It was embezzlement. I leaned in. Tom, I think she's running a scam. And if she's bold enough to come after me, she's probably been doing it to others. His face went pale. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just fighting. For my ranch, I was about to expose Karen's entire operation. But let me tell you something. When you corner someone like Karen, someone who thrives on control, she doesn't just roll over. She gets desperate, and desperate people. Make dangerous moves. Asterisk, asterisk, if you've ever tangled with someone like Karen, you know this. Once they're exposed, they don't retreat, they double down. And that's exactly what she did, a few days after showing Tom the trail cam footage. I woke up to chaos. My cattle were out. The front gate, the one I always kept padlocked, was wide open. Now, here's the thing. A gust of wind can't snap a steel lock. Someone had cut it clean, and I knew exactly who. I spent the better part of that morning corralling animals, swearing under my breath the whole time. When I finally got them secured, I found something even worse spray-painted right across the barn door in dripping red letters, "Foreclosed." I stood there, fists clenched, my jaw tight. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was vandalism, intimidation, a threat, and she thought she could scare me off my own land. Not a chance. I called the sheriff's office again. Deputy Miller, the same guy from before, came out and surveyed the damage. "Looks like criminal mischief," he said, running a finger over the spray paint. "Got any suspects?" I didn't hesitate. "Karen," he raised a brow. "You got proof?" That was the catch. Without footage, without a witness, it was just my word against hers. And if I knew Karen, she'd deny it with a smile. Miller sighed. "Keep documenting. Set up more cameras. If she's bold enough to do this, she'll slip up again." I nodded. But inside, my patience was gone. I wasn't waiting for her to slip up. I was going to shove her into the light. That night, I met with Tom again. We sat in the back of a dusty diner, away from curious ears. He leaned in, voice low. "You were right. I checked the financial summary she gave us at the last meeting. The numbers don't add up. We collect about 50 grand a year in dues. But according to her, almost half of that goes to administrative expenses." "Administrative?" I scoffed. "Like what?" "Paper clips and coffee." "Exactly. We never see receipts, never see actual books," which meant the money was vanishing. And if she had that much nerve with finances, auctioning my property probably wasn't her first rodeo. "Tom," I said, "we need allies. Other board members. Neighbors she's burned. Anyone who'll talk." He nodded slowly. "I'll see who I can reach." The next morning, I got an answer faster than expected. A woman named Linda, who owned a small lot at the edge of the subdivision, called me. "You don't know me," she said. Her voice shaky, but I heard what's happening. "Karen tried the same thing on me last year. Said I owed 10 grand in fines for not trimming my hedges. 10 grand for hedges. When I pushed back, she threatened to take my property too. I paid just to make her stop." My stomach twisted. "You paid her directly?" "Yes, cash. She said it was easier that way." There it was. The smoking gun. She was running a shakedown. The problem? It was still just testimony. Useful, but not bulletproof in court. I needed hard proof. Paper trails. Bank records. Something undeniable. And if Karen was as arrogant as I suspected, she'd be sloppy. That evening, I staged another trap. I set up cameras not just at the gate, but inside the barn, along the fence line, and even hidden near the front porch. If Karen wanted to keep pushing, I'd have her on film. And oh, she pushed. At 2 a.m., headlights cut across the field. A car crept up my driveway. Out stepped Karen, flashlight in hand. Another stack of violation notices tucked under her arm. She marched right up to my porch and taped them to the door. Then, unbelievably, she turned toward the camera, knowingly staring straight into the lens, and muttered, "One way or another. This place will be mine." Click. Recorded. Saved. That was the break I needed. But I wasn't celebrating just yet. Because Karen had one more card to play. The very next morning, a white SUV pulled into my driveway. Out stepped a man in a crisp suit, briefcase in hand. "Mr. Davis," he asked. "That's me." He handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served. Inside a lawsuit, filed by the HOA, or at least filed under Karen's name on behalf of the HOA. They were suing me for breach of covenant, delinquent assessments, and property abandonment." It was official. She was dragging me into court. I called Tom in a fury. She filed a lawsuit, claimed the HOA approved it. He swore under his breath. No vote was taken. She never brought it up. She filed it herself, which meant she was now committing legal fraud. The problem, until I proved it. The court would take her paperwork at face value, and courts move slow. I had 30 days to respond. 30 days to unravel her entire scheme. I met with an attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Rebecca who dealt with crooked HOAs before. She flipped through the lawsuit, shaking her head. "This is garbage," she muttered. "Half these violations aren't even enforceable. The other half are fabricated, so we can beat it." I asked. "Eventually, yes. But here's the thing, HOA boards often get deference in court. Judges assume they're acting in good faith unless you can show otherwise. Which means we need proof she's acting outside her authority. Financial misconduct, abuse of power, fraud." Exactly what I'd been gathering. Rebecca leaned back. "You keep documenting. Get more witnesses. I'll start drafting our response. And trust me, when this blows up, it's going to be ugly." For her, the clock was ticking, and Karen knew it. Because that night, she retaliated again. This time, I woke to the sound of engines. I looked out my window and saw tow trucks lined up at the gate. Karen was there. Arms crossed, clipboard ready. She was trying to seize my vehicles. I stormed outside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She smirked. "Collecting collateral? You owe the HOA, and I have the right to seize assets." I pulled out my phone, camera rolling. "That's illegal. You don't have a court order, and I've got it all on tape." The tow truck drivers hesitated. One of them muttered, "Lady, I'm not touching this. He's filming." Within minutes, they were gone. Karen stood there, fuming, before spitting out, "You'll regret this." I always win. Then she stormed off. But she didn't know what I had her midnight confession caught on camera. Linda's testimony, Tom's admissions, and a lawyer ready to sink her. The trap was closing. Still, I couldn't shake one nagging thought. Why my ranch? Why target me so aggressively when she could have kept bleeding smaller homeowners dry with hedge fines and mailbox citations? There had to be more, and then it hit me. Land my ranch wasn't just any lot. It was the biggest parcel in the HOA's reach. Acres of open pasture. Valuable land. If Karen could snatch it up. She wouldn't just make a payday, she'd control the crown jewel of the community. It was about power, and she'd burn everything down to get it. I sat on my porch that night, watching the stars, thinking about everything she'd tried. Fraud, vandalism, intimidation, lawsuits. She thought she had me cornered. But what she didn't know, I was about to turn the entire neighborhood against her. Because the next HOA meeting, that's when I'd reveal everything on record, in front of everyone, and I'd make sure Karen never scammed another soul again. You ever walk into a room knowing you're about to flip the whole place upside down? That's how I felt walking into the next HOA board meeting. Except this wasn't just another boring night of Karen dictating which shade of beige we were allowed to paint our fences. No, this was war. And I was bringing the receipts. The community center was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it. Word had spread fast. Neighbors whispered in clusters, eyes darting toward me as I entered. Some gave nods of encouragement. Others looked nervous, like they'd seen this play out before and didn't believe anyone could beat Karen. Karen herself sat at the head of the table, dressed sharp clipboard in front of her, like a judge about to hand down a sentence. When she saw me, she smirked. "Ah," she said into the microphone, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "The delinquent rancher has decided to join us. Good, saves me the trouble of mailing you your termination notice." A few people chuckled nervously. Mo stayed silent. I took my seat, calm on the outside, though my blood was boiling. This was it. Karen cleared her throat and launched into her usual performance. "As you all know, we have serious issues in this community. Homeowners failing to maintain standards, dues not being paid, safety concerns." I raised my hand. "Point of order." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't get to interrupt. I do when you're lying." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen leaned forward. "Excuse me." I stood, holding up a flash drive. "I have proof that you've been fabricating violations, extorting homeowners, and illegally threatening foreclosure. And tonight, everyone's going to see it." I walked to the projector by the wall, plugged in the drive, and hit play. On the screen, grainy night vision footage of Karen sneaking onto my property at midnight. Gasps filled the room. There she was, flashlight in hand, stapling fake notices to my gate. And then the damning moment, she turned toward the camera and said, clear as day, one way or another, "This place will be mine." The room erupted, shouts, murmurs. Someone even yelled, "Are you kidding me?" Karen's face drained of color. She scrambled for words. That's taken out of context." I shook my head. "There is no context where that's okay." I pulled out another document. "And here's testimony from Linda. She paid you $10,000 in cash after you threatened to take her property. Cash that never showed up in the HOA books." Linda stood from the back of the room, voice trembling but strong. "It's true. She scared me into paying." I didn't know what else to do. Another neighbor, a man I barely knew, stood up too. "She did the same to me. Claimed my fence was illegal. Said I'd lose my house if I didn't pay a fine. I paid $5,000. Gasps again. It was spreading. Testimonies popping up like fireworks. I turned back to the board. "And Tom here can tell you Karen's been controlling the books, never showing real reports, only her summaries." Tom shifted uncomfortably, but then he stood. "He's right. We've never seen receipts." I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't realize how bad it was. The room buzzed with outrage. Karen slammed her hands on the table. "This is a witch hunt. A smear campaign. None of this is official business." But her voice cracked, and everyone heard it. I pulled out the lawsuit papers she'd had delivered to me. And finally this. A lawsuit she filed in the HOA's name. Except the board never voted on it, which makes it fraud. And if you don't believe me, just ask Tom. Tom nodded. "We never voted. She filed it herself." The room exploded again. This time, the shouts weren't just outrage. They were demands. Remove her. Arrest her. She's been stealing from us. Karen stood, trying to regain control. "You're all being manipulated. He's spinning lies because he doesn't want to pay his dues." I held up my bank statements. Paid in full. Every year. No outstanding balance. She made it all up. Someone yelled from the back. "Then where's all our money been going?" Another voice. "Yeah. Where are the dues?" Karen's mask cracked completely. Her face twisted with rage. "You think you can do this to me? I built this community. Without me, you'd all be living in squalor." That was the moment she lost them, because nobody likes being told they're powerless. The board's vice president, A stern woman named Marcia, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke up. "Karen," she said, her voice cold. "I think you've said enough." Karen spun on her. "Don't you dare turn on me," but Marcia cut her off. "Effective immediately. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in your leadership. All in favor?" Hands shot up, almost unanimous. Karen's face turned crimson. "You can't do this." "I am the HOA." "No," Marcia said, standing tall. "You were." "Not anymore." The room erupted in applause. Neighbors clapped, cheered. Some even whistled. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. She grabbed her clipboard, shoved papers into her bag, and stormed toward the door. But before leaving, she pointed at me, her eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret humiliating me." Then she was gone. The applause died down, replaced by nervous murmurs. Because while Karen had been stripped of her power, she wasn't in handcuffs. Not yet. And if I knew her at all, she wasn't about to go quietly. After the meeting, neighbors gathered around me, thanking me, some shaking my hand. Linda hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You saved us," she whispered. But deep down, I knew we weren't safe yet. Karen was cornered, exposed, furious, and people like her. When you back them into a corner, that's when they strike the hardest. Sure enough, very next morning, I found a new letter in my mailbox. No envelope, no stamp. Just a single sheet of paper with 5 words scrawled across it in red ink. "You'll pay for this." At that moment, I realized the battle was over. But the war had just begun. Asterisk, asterisk. If you thought Karen being voted out of the HOA was the end of it, you don't know. Karen, getting exposed, didn't humble her. It made her reckless. The morning after that, a threatening note appeared in my mailbox. Things started breaking down literally. First, the water line feeding my troughs mysteriously ruptured. A clean saw cut through PVC. Not wear on tear. Not an accident. Sabotage then. 2 nights later, someone loosened the bolts on my corral gate. When I went to herd the cattle in, the whole thing collapsed. If I hadn't been there to stop it, half my herd would have stampeded into the road. And the kicker. A few days after that, I found nails scattered across my driveway. Dozens of them. Rusty, sharp, placed just right to puncture tires. It wasn't just harassment anymore. She was trying to bleed me dry. I called Deputy Miller again. Showed him the damage, the nails, the broken pipes. He sighed. "It's obvious someone's targeting you. But without catching them in the act, it's hard to prove who." I crossed my arms. "You and I both know who." "I know," he admitted. "But Karen's crafty. She'd deny it. And unless you've got footage, my hands are tied." That's when I realized Karen wasn't working alone. She had help. I doubled down on security. Motion lights. More trail cams. Even a dash cam running 24/7 pointed at the driveway. And it paid off. Because one night, the cameras caught something I didn't expect. Not Karen. A man. Mid-40s, heavyset, driving a beat-up truck. He parked by my fence, hopped out, started pouring something into my pasture. When I checked the spot the next morning, I nearly lost it. It was antifreeze. Bright green puddles where my cattle grazed. She wasn't just trying to ruin me financially. She was trying to kill my animals. That was the last straw. I stormed into the sheriff's office with the footage. Miller's jaw tightened as he watched the man dumping poison. "That's attempted animal cruelty," he said. "Felony level, then arrest him." He nodded slowly. "We'll track him down." "Do you recognize him?" I didn't, but I had a hunch. Karen. She might not have poured it herself, but she had connections. And if she was willing to use them, this was bigger than a neighborhood feud. Sure enough, a week later, Miller called me. "We found the guy. Name's Carl. Works maintenance for a property auction company. Auction. Company. It clicked like a puzzle piece, snapping into place. Karen wasn't acting alone. She had ties to people who profited from foreclosures. And if she could push me out, they'd swoop in, sell my land, and split the winnings. This wasn't just personal vendetta. It was organized. I told Rebecca, my attorney, everything. She leaned back in her chair, frowning. "This changes things," she said. "If she's colluding with an auction company, this isn't just HOA misconduct. It's fraud, possibly racketeering." Racketeering. I repeated, "Yeah, a pattern of illegal activity for financial gain. And if we prove it, she could face serious charges." Suddenly, the fight wasn't just about saving my ranch. It was about exposing an entire scheme. But Karen Mustoff sensed the walls closing in. Because she made her boldest move yet. One afternoon, I pulled into my driveway to find a for sale sign planted squarely on my front lawn. Not the kind you buy at Home Depot either. A professional realtor sign. With a phone number, I yanked it out of the ground, furious, and dialed the number. Hello?" A nervous voice answered. "Yeah, this is the owner of the ranch. Why is there a sign in my yard?" The realtor stammered. We were contracted to list the property. Said it was bank-owned. Bank-owned." I nearly laughed. "Buddy, I am the bank. I own it free and clear." Dead silence. "I suggest." I growled. "You verify who hired you before planting signs in people's yards." I hung up, shaking with rage. Karen wasn't just threatening anymore. She was staging the sale. That night, I sat on my porch, turning the for sale sign over in my hands. The audacity. The nerve. The desperation. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. She was running out of moves. Everything she tried, lawsuits, sabotage, scare tactics, it was failing. And desperate people, they get sloppy. Sure enough, Tom called me the next morning. His voice was urgent. "You need to see this," he said. Karen's trying to cover her tracks. He'd managed to get copies of internal HOA emails. And in them, Karen instructing board members to delete unnecessary records and streamline finances. Code for shredding evidence. But the real bombshell was one email chain. Between Karen and a man named G. Harlow. G. Harlow wasn't a neighbor, he was an executive. At the auction company and in the emails. Karen spelled it out. Once the ranch property is secured, we split the proceeds 60/40ths. My jaw dropped. That was it. The smoking gun. Proof she was colluding with outsiders to steal property. I sent the email straight to Rebecca. She called me back within minutes, practically giddy. "This is gold. With this, we don't just have a defense. We have a case. A big one." She paused. "But be careful. If Karen knows you have this, she'll get desperate." I looked out at my land, the fences, the fields, the cattle grazing peacefully under the sun. "Rebecca," I said, "she's already desperate." The next week, subpoenas went out. Rebecca filed motions. The sheriff opened an investigation. And suddenly Karen's world started crumbling. But you know what they say. The brighter the spotlight, the more vicious the shadows. And Karen wasn't about to go down quietly, because her next move, it nearly burned everything to the ground. But I'll tell you about that in the next part. ***, if you've been following this saga. You know by now, Karen didn't quit. She wasn't wired that way. Every time I blocked one of her schemes, she upped the ante. But I never imagined she'd take it this far. It started with smoke. One quiet evening, I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee, when I noticed a faint haze drifting across the pasture. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor was burning brush. But then I smelled it harsh chemical. Wrong. I jumped to my feet. The smoke was coming from my barn. I sprinted across the yard, heart pounding, and when I yanked the doors open, flames licked the hay bales stacked inside. Someone had poured accelerant, set it, and left. I grabbed the hose, doused what I could, and by sheer luck or maybe sheer stubbornness managed to smother it before it spread to the rafters. When the last hiss of steam rose from the blackened hay, I stood there shaking. This wasn't vandalism anymore. This was arson, and it could have killed every animal in that barn. The sheriff came out again, this time with the fire marshal. They walked the perimeter, sniffed the air, scraped samples of the scorched hay. Gasoline, the marshal said. No question. Miller looked at me, grim. She's crossed into felony territory now. Attempted arson. I nodded, jaw tight. You gonna arrest her? We need proof. It was her. Did your cameras catch anything? My stomach dropped. I'd had cameras on the pasture, the porch, even the driveway, but not inside the barn. Nothing. Karen had picked her spot perfectly. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I sat by the window, shotgun propped against the wall, waiting. And sure enough, she came back at 2 a.m., headlights again. This time, I was ready. I killed the porch light and crouched by the window, camera in hand. Out stepped Karen herself. Not her handyman. Not a proxy tar. She crept up the drive with a gas can. My stomach clenched. She walked straight toward the barn. Glancing over her shoulder like some kind of cartoon villain, I hit record. And then, before she could strike another match, I flicked on every floodlight I had. The ranch lit up like daylight. Karen froze. Eyes wide, caught, red-handed. I stepped outside. Camera rolling, shotgun slung across my shoulder. Evening. Karen, I said coldly. Going somewhere? For a split second, she looked like a deer in headlights. Then she snapped. You ruined everything. She shrieked, waving the gas can like a weapon. This land should have been mine. The desperation in her voice was raw, unhinged. I held up my phone. Smile. You're on candid camera. She let out a guttural scream and hurled the gas can toward me. It clattered across the gravel, spilling fumes into the night. That was the moment I dialed 911. The deputies arrived fast. This time, there was no gray area. No, he said. She said. They caught her trying to flee down the road. Miller cuffed her himself, shaking his head. Karen Adams, he said flatly. You're under arrest for attempted arson, trespassing, and reckless endangerment. Even then, she didn't stop. She kicked, screamed, spat curses into the night. You'll regret this. All of you. I'll burn this whole place down. Her voice echoed across the pasture as they shoved her into the back of the cruiser. And then, silence. For the first time in weeks, real silence. I thought that was it. The end. But I was wrong. Because Karen had planted more than just gasoline. She'd planted doubt. The very next morning, I got a call from Rebecca, my attorney. You're not going to believe this, she said. Karen's lawyer just filed a countersuit claiming you set up the fire yourself for sympathy. I nearly dropped the phone. You've got to be kidding me. I wish I was. They're saying you fabricated evidence to smear her. I rubbed my temples. She was literally caught on camera. Doesn't matter, Rebecca said grimly. Her defense is that you staged it. In civil court, all she needs to do is create doubt. Unbelievable. Even behind bars. She was fighting me. But what she didn't realize, she wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was fighting the entire community in the days that followed. Neighbors started coming forward. Stories poured out about shady fees Karen had collected, about threats she'd made. About mysterious notices that vanished once cash changed hands. 1. Neighbor even admitted she'd been too scared to speak up before. Karen had threatened to report her teenage son for criminal trespassing, for riding his bike near the ranch. The picture was crystal clear. Karen wasn't a leader. She was a tyrant, and now she was a criminal. Rebecca put it best when she called me a week later. "She's done," she said. Between the footage, the emails, the attempted arson, and the witness testimonies, she's looking at fraud, embezzlement, and a stack of felonies. She won't be seeing daylight without a jumpsuit for a long time. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt something else, exhaustion, because while Karen might have been going down, the mess she'd left behind was massive. The HOA books were in shambles. Neighbors were demanding answers, and lawsuits hers and mine were still crawling through the courts. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. One evening, I sat on the porch again, staring at the fields, the cattle. The sunset bleeding orange across the horizon. This was my home, my sanctuary, and for weeks it had felt like a battlefield. I whispered to myself. Not anymore, because with Karen locked up, I finally had breathing room to rebuild, to fight smart, to finish this once and for all. But little did I know, Karen still had allies, and they weren't done with me yet. Asterisk, most folks would think an arrest would be the end of it. Karen, caught red-handed with a gas can, hauled away in cuffs, screaming threats into the night. But this wasn't a fairy tale. This was a war, and in war, cutting off the head doesn't always kill the snake. A week after Karen's arrest, I walked into Rebecca's office for a strategy meeting. She looked more tired than I'd ever seen her. Stacks of files piled high on her desk. "You're not going to like this," she said without preamble. I raised an eyebrow. "When do I ever?" She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were court papers, stamped official. A lawsuit filed not by Karen, but by Harlow Auction Group, the very company we'd found in those emails. They're claiming breach of contract, Rebecca explained. They allege that Karen, acting as HOA president, had authority to initiate a deal to liquidate distressed properties, including yours. Now that the deal's collapsed, they're blaming you for interference. I stared at her. Interference? With my own ranch? She nodded grimly. They're demanding damages in the millions. Millions, it felt like a punch to the gut. Karen may have been behind bars, but her allies were alive and kicking. I leaned back, running a hand through my hair. So, let me get this straight. Karen tries to steal my land, gets caught literally trying to torch my barn, and somehow I'm the one getting sued. Rebecca smirked, though there wasn't much humor in it. Welcome to civil law. It's less about truth, more about who's got the sharpest teeth. And I take it these auction people have sharp teeth. Like sharks, she said. But don't panic. We've got ammo. The emails prove collusion. The footage shows Karen's intent, and the fact you never signed a single document. Well, that's our ace. Still, the thought gnawed at me. If they could tie me up in court long enough, drain my resources, maybe even freeze my assets, they could win without ever setting foot on my land. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. It wasn't just Karen anymore. She was just the pawn. The real players were men in suits, hidden behind polished desks, treating people's homes like poker chips, and my ranch, just another hand to play. The next morning, I called Tom. "Ever heard of Harlow Auction Group?" I asked. He let out a bitter laugh. "Heard of M? They're vultures. Buy foreclosed properties for pennies, flip M, and pocket the profit. Half the folks in this county have horror stories." I frowned. "So they've been at this a while. Longer than you'd think. And rumor has it, they grease plenty of palms to keep the wheels turning. Corruption, greed, collusion. It all traced back to the same rotten core. Karen was just the mask. Rebecca filed our response to the lawsuit, but even as she worked, the pressure-mounted bank letters started showing up in my mailbox, suit-in errors in property records, demands for verification of ownership, insurance reps called, randomly reviewing my fire coverage. It was clear someone was pulling strings behind the curtain, trying to rattle me, maybe even bankrupt me through bureaucracy, death by paperwork. But if they thought I'd fold, they didn't know me very well. I doubled down, met with neighbors, gathered statements, built a network of folks who'd also been burned by HOA overreach and shady foreclosure practices, and slowly, a picture started forming. This wasn't just about my ranch. This was systemic. Karen was one cog in a machine designed to seize land, flip it, and line pockets. And I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for everyone they'd steamrolled. A month later, the first court hearing arrived. Walking into that courthouse felt like walking into enemy territory. The auction company's lawyers were there in tailored suits, polished briefcases, smirks plastered across their faces. Me. Just a rancher in worn boots and a jacket that still smelled faintly of smoke. But I had Rebecca by my side. And that was enough. When the judge called the case, their lead attorney stood and painted me as some paranoid, unstable man claiming I'd staged the fire, fabricated emails, and harassed a respected HOA president. Respected, if only the judge had seen her with a gas can at 2 a.m. Rebecca stood, cool as ice, and laid out our evidence. The footage, the emails, the witness statements, every word landed like a hammer. And though the judge didn't dismiss the case outright, I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't buying their fairy tale. Not completely. Afterward, Rebecca pulled me aside. "We've bought time. That's good. But don't expect them to roll over. Companies like this, they've got money to burn. They'll drag it out, appeal, anything to keep the pressure on." I nodded slowly. "So what you're saying is, this is gonna get uglier." She gave a thin smile. "Much uglier." That evening, back at the ranch, I stood by the fence, watching the sun dip low. For weeks, my fight had been against one woman, one Karen. But now, the mask was off, and I finally saw the truth. I wasn't just fighting an HOA. I was fighting an empire. And empires don't go quietly. They strike back. Asterisk, asterisk. I always thought of myself as a lone wolf. My land, my cattle, my work. Sun up to sundown, I didn't need much more. But Karen's war changed that, because what she tried to do to me, she'd done to others. And once folks saw someone stand up to her, they stopped whispering. They started talking, and talking turned into action. It began with a knock on my door. I opened it to find the Johnsons, an older couple from 3 lots down, standing there with a folder of papers. "We heard what Karen did," Mrs. Johnson said softly. "We're so sorry you went through that. She nearly ruined us, too." She handed me the folder. Inside were copies of notices, fines, threats of foreclosure, all signed by Karen. None of it was real, Mr. Johnson said bitterly. She'd make up violations, demand cash. We paid because we were scared. But if you're fighting this, we want in. I invited them in, poured coffee. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just a target. I was a rallying point. Over the next week, more neighbors came forward. The single mom down the road whose weed height violation turned into a $5,000 lien. The retired veteran who'd been told his American flag was unauthorized decor unless he paid a $200 permit fee. Even the Wilsons, who'd lost their property altogether, auctioned off under delinquent dues they never actually owed. Every story was a piece of the puzzle, and the picture was crystal clear. Karen hadn't been freelancing. She'd been a recruiter, funneling land and money into the auction company's hands, and my ranch. That was supposed to be their crown jewel. We started meeting in my barn. The same barn Karen had tried to burn down. I strung up a couple of lights, set out folding chairs, and before long, a dozen neighbors sat in a circle, swapping stories, comparing notes for the first time. People weren't afraid. They were angry. And anger is a powerful fuel. Tom stood up at one of those meetings, holding a stack of old HOA financial records. "Look at this," he said, slapping the papers down on a hay bale. "Line items that don't add up. Thousands missing. Fines collected that never hit the HOA account. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping. This is theft." Gasps filled the room. Heads shook. Mrs. Johnson muttered, "And we just let her do it." I shook my head firmly. "No, she tricked you. She bullied you. That's not the same thing." I looked around the circle. "The question is, what do we do now?" Silence hung heavy for a moment until Tom spoke again. "We fight back. As a group, they've been picking us off, one by one. Isolated, scared, but together." He tapped the papers. "We've got enough evidence to blow this whole thing wide open." I nodded. "He's right. Karen may be in jail, but the machine behind her isn't. If we want to stop them, we've got to show the county, the courts, and anyone else who will listen exactly what's been happening here." That was the moment it shifted. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. The next few weeks turned into a blur of late-night meetings, document scanning, and strategy talks. Rebecca coordinated with us, helping organize the evidence into something that would hold up in court. We formed a neighborhood committee, ironically, the very thing the HOA had claimed to be. But this time, it wasn't about control. It was about survival. And for the first time, people laughed again. We shared food, swapped stories, even joked about Karen's downfall. It felt like taking our lives back. But I'd be lying if I said it was all sunshine, because the auction company noticed flyers started appearing on mailboxes anonymous. Warnings about how organizing against the HOA could result in severe legal consequences. 1. Neighbor found their tires slashed. Another got a call from a collections agency demanding payment for fines that no longer even existed. The message was clear. The empire was watching, and it wanted us scared again. One night, after a meeting wrapped up, I walked Mrs. Johnson to her car. She looked up at me, voice trembling. "Do you think we can really win?" I hesitated, then answered honestly. "I don't know," I said. "But I do know one thing: we sure as hell can't win if we don't try." She nodded, gripping my hand. "Then we'll try." Together, her words stuck with me. Because this fight wasn't about certainty. It was about courage. The turning point came when Rebecca arranged a press contact. "If the courts are slow, the public isn't," she said. "Shine a light on this, and they'll have a harder time burying it." So we did. We handed over documents, testimonies, recordings. And within a week, a local paper ran a story. HOA corruption scheme. Tied to auction company, neighbors speak out. It spread like wildfire suddenly. What happened on my ranch wasn't just gossip. It was news. And that meant the machine couldn't operate in the shadows anymore. Of course. That also meant they came after me harder. Anonymous calls at 3 a.m., a drone buzzing my pasture at midnight. Even a black SUV parked across from my gate for 3 nights straight. Engine idling. Intimidation tactics. But I'd been through worse, and now I wasn't standing alone. One evening, after a long day, I sat out on the porch with Tom. "You ever think," he said, staring at the sunset, that maybe this was Karen's mistake. Going after you. I smirked. What do you mean? She wanted your ranch so bad, she forgot something. He looked at me. You don't back down. I chuckled. Guess that's true. He nodded. And now, because of that, all of us finally have a shot at justice. His words hit me deep. Karen thought she was breaking me, but in trying, she'd done the opposite. She'd united us. But here's the thing about unity. It threatens people who profit off division. And when the empire felt that threat, it struck back in the most brutal way yet. The thing about fighting a beast that big is, the closer you get to cutting its heart out, the harder it thrashes. And after the press ran that story, the beast thrashed hard. It started small. Harassing phone calls. Anonymous letters in my mailbox telling me to quit while you're ahead. A brick through Tom's window with a note taped to it, "Stay out of this." Then it escalated. One night, I came home from town and found the gate wide open. My cattle scattered into the road. If a car had come down that highway, it could have been a massacre. Took me all night to round them up again. Another neighbor's truck got torched in his driveway. Nothing but a blackened frame left by morning, and through it all, the auction company's lawyers kept hammering us in court. Motion after motion, delay after delay, trying to bleed us dry. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was war by attrition. But the problem with trying to wear down a man who's been through hell already? He's too stubborn to quit. I wasn't backing down, neither were my neighbors. We were in this till the bitter end. Rebecca called me one morning with urgency in her voice. They're trying to fast-track foreclosure proceedings. Again, she said, claiming your property taxes are delinquent. That's a lie, I snapped. I paid them early this year. I know, she said. But the county office got flooded with corrections to your records. Someone's tampering. We need to fight it immediately, tampering with county records. That wasn't desperation. That was power, and whoever was behind Harlow Auction Group had plenty of it. I hung up the phone and stared out at my land. The fences, the fields, the animals grazing like nothing was wrong. To me, this wasn't just property. It was my life, my family legacy, and I'd be damned if I let anyone steal it on paper after failing to take it by fire at the next court date. The auction company came out swinging. Their lead attorney strutted in like a rooster in a suit, dumping a mountain of files onto the table. Your Honor, he declared, we have proof of delinquent taxes, non-compliance with HOA bylaws, and fraudulent claims made by the defendant to smear a respected property management partnership. Respected. There was that word again. Rebecca rose calmly. And we have proof of forgery, embezzlement, collusion, and attempted arson by their so-called partners. She handed over the emails, the video footage, sworn testimonies from half a dozen neighbors. The judge's eyes narrowed as he flipped through the stack. This is substantial, he muttered. The attorney bristled. Unsubstantiated accusations? The judge slammed his gavel. Quiet, I'll decide what's substantiated. For the first time, I saw a crack in their armor. They weren't untouchable anymore. But cracks don't mean collapse. That night, the retaliation hit closer than ever. I woke to headlights sweeping across my house. By the time I grabbed the shotgun and ran outside, a truck was already peeling away down the dirt road, tires spitting gravel, and in the yard. A sign staked into the ground, spray-painted in red letters. Next time you burn. I stood there in the dark, gripping the shotgun, chest heaving. They wanted me scared. They wanted me rattled enough to quit. But all it did was light a fire in me stronger than the one Karen tried to start in my barn. The very next day, we doubled security. Neighbors pooled money for cameras, motion lights, even a couple of hired guards for the properties most at risk. It wasn't just about my ranch anymore. We were protecting each other, and when word spread about what was happening, more folks came forward from outside our neighborhood. People who'd lost land, money, homes to the same company. Harlow Auction Group wasn't just preying on us. They were everywhere. We were just the first ones to stand up. Rebecca scheduled depositions. One by one, Karen's former allies were forced to answer questions under oath. Most clammed up, pleading the fifth. But one board member cracked. He admitted Karen had pressured him to sign off on false fines. That the auction company paid consulting fees to board members willing to push homeowners into foreclosure. That was the smoking gun we needed. Not just shady business, racketeering. When Rebecca told me, I almost didn't believe it. This isn't civil anymore, she said. This is criminal conspiracy. If the DA picks it up, it won't just be Karen in an orange jumpsuit. It'll be half the board and maybe even Harlow executives, for the first time in months. I felt real hope, the kind of hope that makes you stand a little taller, breathe a little easier. But the beast wasn't done thrashing. A week later, on my way back from town, I noticed a black SUV in the rearview mirror. Same one that had idled outside my ranch before. This time, it followed me. Mile after mile. When I turned off onto the dirt road, turn 2, by the time I reached my driveway, adrenaline was surging in my veins. I pulled in fast, jumped out of the truck with the shotgun visible. The SUV idled at the end of the drive for a long moment, headlights glaring through the dust. Then it slowly reversed, turned, and disappeared down the road. They wanted me to know they were watching, but I wanted them to know something too. I wasn't scared anymore. The next court hearing was set to be the biggest yet. The judge would decide whether to throw out the auction company's lawsuit or let it move forward. Neighbors packed the benches, showing support. Local reporters scribbled notes. When the attorneys gave their arguments, you could feel the tension buzzing in the room. The auction lawyer painted me as a troublemaker, a liar, a dangerous man who'd poisoned the community. Rebecca painted a very different picture. A homeowner fighting to save not just his land, but his neighbors from a predatory scheme. When she laid the gas can on the evidence table, the very one Karen had dropped in my driveway, could hear the gasp ripple through the courtroom. The judge leaned back, eyes sharp. This case, he said slowly, is no longer just about property disputes. It raises serious questions of fraud and criminal conduct. I am referring it to the district attorney for further investigation. The auction lawyer's face drained of color. We'd won the battle, but the war was about to get even bigger, because now, it wasn't just a civil matter, it was a criminal case, and that meant the machine would fight harder than ever to protect itself. I walked out of that courthouse, into a swarm of reporters shoving microphones in my face. Do you think Karen acted alone? What do you say to claims you staged the fire? Are you worried about retaliation? I just looked at the cameras and said the only thing that mattered. This fight was never about one ranch. It's about every family they've tried to steal from. And we're not backing down. The crowd erupted in questions, but I kept walking. Neighbors flanking me like an honor guard, because whatever came next, we were ready. Karen's empire was cracking, and soon it would collapse. When the district attorney picked up the case, it felt like the tide had finally turned. No more half measures. No more civil motions and endless delays. Now it was criminal, and Karen. The HOA board, even the suits at Harlow Auction Group, suddenly, they weren't predators anymore. They were prey. The indictments came down one by one: fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, attempted arson. Karen got hit with the heaviest charges. Her smug little empire crumbled in a day. The board members scattered like rats off a sinking ship, some flipping on each other to cut deals. And the Harlow executives. For the first time, they were dragged into the light. Subpoenaed, investigated, their paper trails exposed. Turns out my ranch wasn't the only one they'd targeted. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, families across the state who'd been tricked, pressured, or outright stolen from my fight had opened a floodgate, and now the current was dragging them all under. The trial was a spectacle. Karen sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, her hair a mess, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Gone was the polished queen of the HOA, barking orders and threatening fines. What sat there was just a bitter woman stripped of her crown. When the prosecution laid out the evidence, the gas can, the emails, the witness testimony, she crumbled. Her lawyer tried to spin it, claiming she'd been pressured by bigger forces. That she was a scapegoat. Maybe she was partly right. But no one forced her to stalk my property. No one forced her to try and burn my barn. That was all Karen. And the jury saw it plain as day, guilty on every count. But the trial didn't stop with her. The real meat was in the executives from Harlow Auction Group. They strutted in with expensive lawyers, trying to bury the jury in jargon and paperwork. But Rebecca and the DA cut through it like a hot knife. They showed the payments to HOA boards, the false fines issued to homeowners, the forged foreclosure notices. Ebb was systematic theft dressed up in legal language. And once the jury understood that, the suits didn't look powerful anymore. They looked guilty. When the verdicts came back, I swear the whole courtroom held its breath. One by one. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The machine had finally been broken when it was all over. I walked out of that courthouse with Rebecca at my side and neighbors crowding around me. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed, but all I felt was relief. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe easy. My ranch was safe. Not because some system had protected me, no. The system had tried to chew me up and spit me out. It was safe because we fought, because we refused to bow down, and because we stood together. Karen was sentenced to 15 years. She cried in court, begged for leniency, claimed she'd lost everything. But when the judge handed down the sentence, he said the words I'd been waiting to hear. You abused your power, betrayed your community, and endangered lives. This is justice. As for Harlow, their empire crumbled. Executives jailed. Assets seized. For once, the little guys won. Months later, life on the ranch finally settled back into rhythm. Cows grazing in the pasture. Horses running the fence line. The smell of fresh-cut hay on the breeze. The cameras still stood, though most of them weren't needed anymore. The guards had gone home. The neighbors had rebuilt what was broken. Peace had returned, but it wasn't the same peace as before. It was stronger because we knew what could happen when power goes unchecked, and we knew how to fight it. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the hills, golden light spilling across the fields. Tom pulled up, climbed out of his truck, and sat beside me with a couple of cold beers. You ever think we'd actually win? He asked. I chuckled. Honestly, no, not for a while. He nodded. Feels good though, don't it? I took a long sip, staring out at the horizon. Yeah, I said softly. It does. We sat there in silence for a while, the crickets chirping, the cattle lowing in the distance. The world felt right again, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed it might just stay that way. Of course, scars remain. There are nights I still wake up. Sure, I've heard footsteps by the barn. Times I catch a glimpse of a black SUV, and my stomach knots. But then I remember Karen's locked away. The machine is dismantled and my ranch still stands. That's victory enough for me. So if you're listening to this, let me leave you with one thought. Home isn't just land, or walls, or property lines. Home is where you stand your ground, where you draw the line and say, "This far, no further tease, Karen." Tried to steal that from me. The auction company tried to crush me. But they forgot one thing. You can't auction off grit. You can't foreclose on determination. And you sure as hell can't burn down a spirit that refuses to break. This is my ranch, and it always will be. Asterisk, asterisk, and ... That's a wrap. A huge thank you to everyone for watching. This channel is nothing without this amazing community. If you have ideas for future videos, drop them down in the comments below. As always, subscribe if you're new here. Until next time, take care.